How many of you have been told that you need to scout your opponent? It's one of the most common pieces of advice, next to constantly creating villagers. But even though it's common, does anyone really know specifically what this means? In this video, we'll go over what it means to scout your opponent, what you're looking for, and how to actually use the information that you gather. By the end, you'll hopefully learn to value information gathering more, which will lead you to becoming a more strategic player. Okay, first, what even is scouting? Scouting is when you try to gather new information about your opponent by sending a unit to an area that you don't have vision of. This allows you to gain information that you didn't previously have, such as where resources are, where your opponent is, and what your opponent is building. I'll give many more examples later, but I should mention now that scouting is simply one aspect of information gathering in this game. Other ways to gather information include selecting units to see upgrades, looking at the score, and checking market prices. Scouting is by far the most common way to gain information, but checking upgrades can be equally as important. Now, the raw information that you gather doesn't do anything for you if you don't know how to process it, so let's look at some common things that you'll be wise to think about when you're playing. Starting in Dark Age, we all know to find our starting sheep and boars, then maybe our gold and berries, then scout the opponent, right? Well, actually, there are a few more things you can think about before ever sending your scout to your opponent's base. If you're planning on having walls at some point, which you'll want to work towards in Feudal Age most of the time, think about how to efficiently build your walls while you're scouting your base at the start of the game. I have plenty of videos on how to wall, so check those out to learn more, but just make sure that you're thinking about building placement based on how your map is laid out. Another thing to keep in mind is where potential TC locations are. I'm sure we've all been in the situation where we reach Castle Age and want to place TCs, but then have to scramble to figure out where to place them, and then waste a bunch of time. You can reduce the mental load in Castle Age by thinking about this in Dark Age. If you know where you want to place TCs, then that can influence where you wall and where you build your buildings, which you'd prefer not to delete in order to make a TC. The structure of your map should influence how you open or follow up your opening. If the map is easily wallable, getting those walls down early can be good. If you have very exposed resources, then you'll want to make more military and consider placing a tower as a way to repel the enemy army. You should plan this all out in Dark Age, as it's civilization and map dependent, so you can't really know exactly how you want to play before the game starts, assuming you're playing random civ on Arabia. This is why it's so important to practice the mechanical things like making villagers, as well as having a basic plan for how to balance your economy, and when you want to go to Feudal Age, aka having a build order. Freeing your mind to think about the things that are different each game, namely the map and the matchup, will allow you to adapt better to the situation. Of course, knowing your and your opponent's tech trees is fundamental if you want to be able to play towards your advantages and your opponent's weaknesses. Like build order, you can learn civilizations outside of playing games, but you'll still slowly learn them as you play games as well, so I wouldn't worry too much about trying to memorize tech trees, unless that's your thing. As you've got your base plans and desired opening thought of, it's time to go check up on your opponent. Just like scouting your own base, you can think about where your opponent's walls will be, where their woodline, berries, and main gold is, where their TCs might be, and more. Just knowing about these things isn't enough, though. Process that information so it can be useful to you. Opponent has forward berries and is likely to open scouts. Maybe you could do men-at-arms, forward trash rush, or tower rush. Opponent has one easily takeable woodline which is forward, and your civ can be faster to feudal, for example Mongols. Maybe send vills to tower rush with your scouts opening. Opponent has an easily wallable map and the better eco-civ, for example your Tatars versus Vikings. It might be better not to overcommit to Feudal Age here, and instead go for an early Castle Age crossbowman timing with forward siege and a strong boom behind it. As you can see, depending on the map and civs, there are many plans that you can make. The first step is scouting, and the second step, thinking. There's a way to know when the opponent has started researching the next age using the score. Since when you spend resources, you lose score, when spending a lot of resources at once, such as aging up, you can see that the opponent clicked to the next age when their score drops considerably. For Feudal Age, it's 50 points. For Castle, it's 100, and for Imp, it's 180. Just knowing when they clicked doesn't mean anything on its own though, so again, let's process it. One of the major things that you can get from reaching Feudal Age is a stronger and faster scout. Whoever's up first may be able to kill their opponent's scout if it's out of position. If you know your opponent is up first, you can avoid making risky moves with your scout, such as being too far away from your TC. A faster uptime from your opponent can also indicate their strategy. Knowing that scout opening doesn't require as many resources to make work means that the faster your opponent is up, the more likely they're opening scouts. You should still confirm their opening by scouting around, but you can have your suspicions as to what they're doing based on uptime. If you see a mining camp on gold in Dark Age or on the way to Feudal Age, then you will be up against gold units such as militia in Dark Age or men-at-arms and archers in Feudal Age. Connecting the dots between seeing a mining camp and the opponent making gold units seems obvious, but sometimes making these obvious connections can be easy to forget when you're focused on everything else in the game. A barracks built before starting feudal research will likely be infantry, and a racks being built on the way up will likely be archery range or stable opening. Against melee units, it can be wise to resource wall your woodline and berry villagers, but against ranged units, walling to the town center can be more effective. If your opponent has 2 lumber camps, you know that they're investing more into their economy, so they won't have as strong of an initial rush as they've invested 100 extra wood into their economy. In this case, you might try to go extra aggressive if you can, or maybe you can justify playing a little bit more economic yourself, such as getting horse collar if you can't punish the opponent. 2 lumber camps can also mean that your opponent isn't trying to go to Castle Age super fast and just wants to play Feudal Age with an efficient economy. This means that while they won't be doing the fastest rush possible, they'll have the potential to make more units throughout Feudal, as well as transition to Castle Age in a strong economic position. Since 2 lumber camps spreads villagers more, it can be harder to defend, so sometimes you can see some weakness in your opponent's defense that you can exploit. 5 or more on berries could indicate men-at-arms, scouts, or fast castle play. If your opponent is relying so heavily on berries, this makes it a high priority target for you to attack. If you see a few villagers on stone, your opponent is likely tower rushing you. If you see a lot on stone, they're likely going fast Castle Age unique unit. If you're unsure what your opponent is up to, continue to scout until you see what's up. If your scout cavalry dies, you can always send a spearman or skirmisher to go scout instead. Knowing what units, how many, and what upgrades they have will make it so much easier to come up with an appropriate response. You should at least scout the opponent's base as soon as they're up to Feudal Age to see which military building they add. Usually, this building will be on the front of their base, so check here first. This is the same for any age uptiming. You want to know what the opponent is going to be doing with all that new tech that they've just unlocked. For Castle Age, there are way more options, but scouting potential TC locations will tell you a lot. If you see TCs, you can be sure that they're not doing a strong all-in and are playing towards the later stages in the game. Seeing a university will indicate later TCs, but difficult to stop crossbowmen or cavalry archers with ballistics. In this case, you don't want to skimp on defenses such as siege or skirmishers. An often overlooked aspect of information gathering, especially on low levels, is that when you attack, you're also gathering information. As long as you keep the town center running in Dark Age, and then make military as soon as possible in Feudal Age, you should be safe to move out with your army pretty quickly. For example, say that you're playing archers versus scouts. The scouts player will be up a bit faster, and with the starting scout, will be able to start harassing you very soon after reaching Feudal Age. As the archers player, your army comes out later, so you'll need to have an answer to the opponent's scouts if you want to move out safely. Remember, the opponent will be harassing with his army, which is giving him information about your army. Your best response to scouts opening can be to make a few spearmen, wait for 2 or 3 archers, Then send your 2 or 3 archers and a couple spearmen forward as soon as possible to try to get damage done before your opponent can respond. Since your opponent sees you making archers and spears, the obvious response for them is to add skirmishers. If they don't add skirmishers, you might be able to do some major damage, since scouts can't really fight your army at this point. To be safe with this play, you still need to have walls to prevent scouts from damaging you, as well as fletching. If you get the blacksmith when you move out, fletching should come in on time before you reach the opponent's base. If you miss this timing of when the opponent is vulnerable due to only having scouts, you might not be able to safely move out until Castle Age. Gaining that information by forcing your opponent to reveal what they're doing by attacking them will let you follow up your current strategy more intelligently. The worst is if you're just massing archers from one range all of Feudal Age, and the opponent attacks with scouts and skirmishers. With just archers, you'll have a hard time pushing this back. The earlier you know about the skirmisher addition, the more options you have open for you. Since skirmishers cost food, it can be difficult to maintain them as well as scouts and villagers, so you can assume your opponent will stop scout production for a while to get enough skirmishers to be useful. Skirms in low numbers aren't that scary if you have your starting scout alive. While your opponent is making skirms, you could add a stable to make your own scouts. If you can get ahead of your opponent in the scouts count, then the skirm's effectiveness will be greatly reduced. Scouts with archer support can be much stronger than scouts with skirmisher support, especially if you can micro. Another response to skirmishers here is just to match them by adding another range and making archers and skirms. As long as you keep enough archers alive to kill scouts, you should be fine with this composition. It also helps if you want to play crossbowmen later, as you'll have 2 ranges which you can use. A third option against skirm and scouts is to make sure that your walls are secure. With archers behind walls, you should be able to micro a bit and prevent the enemy from getting in. The game can play out in many ways, which is why it's so important to gather information and think about what that information means. You should get in the habit of selecting your opponent's units to check upgrades. That gives you a good idea of the level investment that they're making into military compared to economy. If you see your opponent is lacking upgrades, it might be a good time to force a fight with your stronger upgraded units. This applies even from the early game. If you see your opponent skipped loom on the way to Feudal Age, and you're both up at the same time, you'll have 25 seconds upon reaching Feudal Age to pick off an unloomed villager before their research comes in. If you see your opponent massing ranged units, but they didn't upgrade them, you can have suspicions that they're trying to go to Castle Age faster. On the other hand, if you see upgrades on scouts early, then they will be committing heavily to Feudal Age. Seeing bloodlines only on the enemy scout while they also have ranged unit upgrades probably means that they want to go into cavalry archers. Seeing just +1 armor and bloodlines on knights likely means that they're spending their resources to get their boom going first, while having units on the map to force you to respond. If you see 2/2 upgrades on knights in early Castle Age though, you can be sure that they will be attacking with a strong knight mass. If you just see armor on knights and you're doing crossbowmen or cavalry archers, expect to see elite skirms or scorpions as well. There are so many conclusions you can make from checking your opponent's upgrades, so make sure you do it often as the situation can change in an instant. As the game progresses, if you have map control, it can be a good idea to place outposts around the map. This can help to spot the opponent's attack path, if they're taking resources on the map, if they're making a castle somewhere, which units they're building, and more. Knowing in advance of where the opponent's army will attack will let you counterattack a different location, as well as split off enough units to defend at the same time. Also, just being able to get your villagers to safety in time is a big plus. A tell for if someone is going to Castle Age fast is by checking the market prices. If you see that they've sold stone and bought food, then it's very likely that they've already started researching Castle Age. There's one other niche way to gain information, similar to checking market prices, and that's to check the price of spies to see how many villagers your opponent has. Spies cost 200 gold per enemy villager, so doing some quick math, you can tell how well their boom is going. If your opponent is ahead economically, you need to be attacking to come back in the game. Okay, hopefully this has given you some better ideas as to what you're looking for when scouting, and also what to actually do with that information. Let me know in the comments if there's some things that I've missed that you're always looking for while scouting, and I'll see you next time.